On this episode of the How to Japanese podcast, I'll be talking with translator and localizer Mel Ok. Mel and I both worked at the same translation company at different times as a translation project manager, and he's gone on to work on some pretty amazing projects. So I'm really excited for you to hear about his experience. Mel Ok is a translator and project manager based in Tottori Prefecture. He's currently the head of Ace Honnyaku and has been in the translation industry for over 10 years. Previously, he served as a CIR on the JET program, taught English, and worked in Q&A. Mel, thanks so much for taking time to come on the podcast today. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Good. Yeah, no, I'm excited to get this going again and curious to talk with more translators. So I guess I want to start broadly this season. How did you learn Japanese?
So I grew up in Hawaii, and as most people know, there are a lot of Japanese people there and a lot of Japanese tourists. And so when I had to choose a language in high school, I think my options were Japanese, French, German, or Spanish. I think those were my options. And I figured, if I'm going to live in Hawaii, if I ever want to find a job here in the future, Japanese would probably be the most useful. So that was kind of the practical decision. And I decided to study Japanese. And, once you start studying a language, you don't just study the language. You learn about the culture, you learn about the food, the music, entertainment. And I just fell in love with everything and just continued my studies throughout college.
That's great. So did you go to Japan before you went to college, or was your first time in Japan after you started studying in college?
I had one opportunity to visit Japan. It was my senior year in high school, and we were supposed to do a homestay in Japan. But it was the year 2000. In the year 2000, there was some incident at a high school where one student stabbed another or something. That's what we were told. And so they canceled the homestay, but they didn't want to cancel the trip. And so we got to come to Tokyo. We just stayed at a hotel with a chaperone, of course, for a week. And we just visited game centers. We went to Mount Fuji. It was my first time seeing snow.
Oh, wow.
First time eating lots of different, because I'm from Hawaii, right?
Yeah.
So lots of, first times to eat different types of foods and stuff. I think takoyaki was the first, whatnot. So
that incident is the stabbing happened in Japan?
Yeah, it was some high school incident in Japan.
Sure.
So they didn't want us to do homestay. I went to a Baptist high school. So
got it.
I guess they were just a little bit worried.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure because it seems like that's something that would totally happen the opposite way, like a Japanese group trying to homestay in the U.S. and then there's a school shooting or something like that. But that's really interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, there's no guns in Japan, so all they have are knives.
Sure. So, tell me about your high school classes compared to your college classes. When you went, did you feel like you're able to communicate?
You mean communicate in Japanese?
Yeah, or do you think it took until the college courses for things to really start to click in terms of being able to use the language effectively?
To be honest, to use it effectively, I would have to attribute that to coming here and living here in Japan and just being surrounded by it 24/7.
Got it.
Because, you learn it in the States, and even if you go to class 5 days a week, it's still only like an hour a day. And unless you have Japanese friends outside of that classroom, you're not practicing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can watch all the anime you want, all the movies you want. You're still not really practicing it until you actually speak it. So I don't think it actually clicked until I started living here.
Sure. Are there any moments that you remember in terms of you were able to use it that stand out?
Oh gosh. There are a few key moments, I guess. The one that's most memorable is when I started dreaming in Japanese.
Oh, wow.
Because I've never dreamed in Japanese before. And then, people appear in your dream and they start talking to you. And, the funny thing is, I think sometimes they use words that you don't actually know. So I don't know if I'm actually learning in my sleep or not. But yeah, it was interesting. And the thing is, I grew up speaking Chinese with my grandma. Mm-hmm. And so what was interesting is depending on who showed up in my dream, the language would change. Right? If my grandma showed up, I wouldn't be speaking to her in Japanese. I'd be speaking to her in Chinese. And if a friend showed up, I'd be speaking to them in English. So it was really interesting. That's, I think, a very defining moment where I think it actually clicked, because you're so fluent that
Hmm.
you can dream in the language.
Sure. So when you went from high school to college, were you able to test out of any courses, or did you start in like the Ninensei classes or something like that?
So here, that's another story. They had me do a placement test,
Hmm.
and there was just one grammar point that I didn't learn in high school that they taught in their first year Japanese,
Hmm.
which is the potential form. And because I didn't know it, I answered all those questions wrong. And so they placed me in first year Japanese.
Oh
So
no.
funny. But then I talked to, like, one of the Japanese teachers or advisors or whatever, and they're like, they're looking at my high school textbooks, and they're like, "Oh, why don't you just jump straight to third year?" And I was like,
Oh
"Wait,
wow.
wait, wait, wait. First you placed me in first year. Now you're telling me to go to third year." So what I did was, it was the summer of my freshman year. I did the intensive second year course, which was all 3 semesters, or all three quarters, all in one summer course.
Hmm.
And I just basically reviewed. It was mostly review for me, but I just wanted to make sure that I was ready for third year. Um, and so, yeah, I tested out of basically first and second year.
Got it.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I recently got back in touch with my third year Japanese teacher from college, and that year in particular was one that stood out in terms of some of the things that they were teaching, like
Okay.
rules for kanji compounds and
Oh,
story.
sure.
They were making us do like storytelling practice and
Sure.
scanning, like scanning newspaper headlines for kanji,
Wow.
and
In
just
third
like
year Japanese. Huh.
yeah, but it was like we weren't supposed to understand everything. I think the idea
I see.
was like trying to find what information we could, and that they had
Okay.
evidence that showed um, some of that skimming, those skimming activities. You're kind of exercising your eyes and getting used to seeing the language in a kind of more holistic way.
I see.
Was there anything that stood out from during your college time that, in terms of the way that they approached the language, that was helpful?
So I went to the University of Washington, and at the time, I hear this program is now gone, but it was called the Technical Japanese Program.
Hmm.
And you could even major or minor in it. So it was like an advanced Japanese program, basically teaching you very technical terms, technical words, and basically how to work in Japan. It's kind of like a CIR crash course almost,
Oh
you could
wow.
say. Um, and there was one particular method that our sensei taught us about translating long Japanese sentences, and that really stood out to me.
Okay.
And what it is you need to define the main subject and the main verb, and you just like circle them or something. And once you have that, then you look at the rest of the sentence, like what is describing each other noun in the sentence, and like how to work that out. Because really, really long Japanese sentences could be like an entire paragraph, right? I'm sure you've
Sure.
seen those in translation
Definitely.
before. And for people who aren't used to it, they'll get confused. Like, what is this talking about? What is this modifying? Whatnot. But if you break it down, it's really not easy to understand, but it's manageable. And that was really useful for at least translating and just understanding Japanese in general.
Definitely, I can see that. Finding some kind of anchor
Hmm.
to kind of like center yourself. And yeah, I have this Japanese reading group that I've been doing through US Jetta, and sometimes with longer sentences, I'll just tell them, go to the end of the sentence. Let's see what verb is
Yeah,
there, or something like
there
that,
you go.
and then kind
Yep,
of let's even
work
if we're
backward.
start from there. What can we make of the sentence from that? That's a really interesting technique, and not one that I don't think I was taught, but Jay Rubin has a book of essays about it, and he kind of mentions it there, that's an interesting technique.
Great. It's like
Um,
really good because they don't teach that to you in like normal Japanese classes,
yeah,
or at least I don't think they do, right?
yeah, no, it's because I feel like, I mean, my courses unfortunately didn't focus on translation as much, and which is I think a good thing and a bad thing, right? Because it's a
Mhm.
good thing in that you're forced to kind of just do the language. You're forced to kind
Right.
of reckon with things only in Japanese. But
Mhm.
I do think that one of the results of that was it took me longer to get away from the Japanese when I did start translating. I was mirroring, as I think a term you use on Twitter quite a lot.
Yes, yes, yes.
But did you study abroad during your college time?
I did not.
Okay.
I don't know what it was. I didn't have the chance to. If I got into business school,
Hmm.
if I got into the business school, I probably would have like focused on an international business track and then would have done study abroad. But I didn't get into business school. I just majored in Japanese linguistics. So never had the chance to. I did spend one summer in Japan in my college years to teach English.
Oh, great.
It was a volunteer program through like a church organization. So
Okay.
I did that, but I did not do study abroad.
Okay. And so the first substantial time you spent in Japan would have been after you graduated. Was that the JET program, or was it?
Actually, it wasn't.
Was it?
I didn't place the first time I did the jet interview. I was so nervous. I guess I didn't make a good impression, and so I came here to teach English for a year.
Okay.
I
That's
mean,
great.
that's what everyone else does, right?
Sure. Yeah. No. And where were you based when you did that?
I was in Chiba Prefecture. I was in Kashiwa City.
Okay.
Yeah, it
And
was good.
and how was that? What did you make of teaching English?
It was fine. I mean, it's not for everyone, right? For me, it was just a way to be in Japan. And I'm not like,
Hmm.
trying to diss on the profession or anything. Like good
Sure.
English teachers are passionate and they're making a difference out there. It's just I'm saying that's not for everyone.
For
Right?
sure.
But
Definitely.
for Eikaiwa, it's like it's kind of a way in, if you have no other way to get to Japan.
Hmm.
Um, and I really wanted to be in the JET program. So my plan was to do that for a year and then reapply, which is what I did. And I did get in the next year. So
Great. And when you
everything.
initially applied, you applied as a CIR or an ALT?
CIR.
Okay. Got it.
Remember, I just said I don't really like to teach. So
Sure. Yeah.
I
I-
definitely didn't want to be an ALT.
Yeah, when I interviewed for JET, one of the first things they asked me was, would you be willing
Yep.
to do ALT or CIR? And so I
Right.
felt like I kind of had the benefit of having both or being considered for both, but then I
Right.
ended up as a CIR in a very rural area.
Right.
Whereas I think you were in a slightly more urban area, if not super urban. Were you
Actually,
prefectural
Tottori has the
capital?
smallest population per square kilometer in Japan.
Oh wow,
And area-wise, we're the second smallest. But for some reason, the governor really puts a lot of effort into internationalization efforts. So we have a lot of CIRs in Tottori,
oh
which
wow,
is why it's there. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I can tell you more about that
sure,
if we're jumping into that now.
definitely, yeah,
Um, there was something else I wanted to mention. Oh, okay. So as you know, like not all CIR positions are purely translation and interpreting
sure,
job, right? Like some of them are kind of like half AOT work, half CIR work,
hmm
which is why I think they asked that question. It's not necessarily to force you to be an AOT
hmm
like 100% of the time. It's just some CIR positions are kind of a mix of both. So now I know why they asked that question, right?
hmm definitely,
Um,
yeah. I think they're trying to kind of better match people into
exactly.
the placements. Mine was like 95%
Hmm.
ALT work, to be honest, but
Well, yeah.
and then what? So which city were you in Tottori?
I was in Tottori City. I was
Okay.
at the Kencho. I was at the prefectural government office. So I was in Tottori City, Tottori Prefecture. What else can I say about that? So, okay, at my time there, we had 11 concurrent CIRs.
Wow.
So there were two Chinese, one Taiwanese, one Russian, one Mongolian, four Korean, and two English-speaking CIRs. So I'm
Wow.
pretty sure we had the most CIRs in one office in the entire nation. I didn't confirm it with all other prefecture offices, but I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure, like if not the most, like one of the most, well-equipped internationalization offices.
Sure.
I spent only 2 years doing the program. However, and you might get jealous after I tell you this, but I got to go to Malaysia,
Hmm.
Mongolia, Vermont with a stop through New York City, and there was one more place, Thailand. Yeah, I went to 4 countries to interpret in 2 years as a CIR.
That's amazing.
Exactly.
That's
So,
like a regular business job, I feel like. I mean, you're traveling
mhm,
as much as basically I was traveling in my
mhm,
day job when we could travel.
right,
Interesting.
right. I mean, I wasn't equipped for the very first interpreting job because I had arrived in late July, and like it was mid September? They sent me to Thailand, or it was Malaysia, and I thought it would be consecutive interpreting. And for those out there who don't know what that is the speaker speaks and then you interpret what they speak. But I got there and I see a booth and I'm like, uh-oh, I know what this means. And it was for sure, it was simultaneous interpreting, meaning you don't have the time to wait for them to say everything. You have to do it on the spot. And I obviously failed. I tried to take as many notes as I could while they were speaking and trying to interpret, but I couldn't do it. But
Wow.
at least we could confirm with our representatives afterwards.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, this is what they said. And yeah,
Man,
I
that's
was
like
not.
trial by fire.
It definitely was.
Wow.
So make sure you know what you're getting yourself into if they ever ask you to interpret.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's the first question, simultaneous or consecutive, because they're very different activities.
Very, very different.
So, yeah, I mean, actually, I want to give a quick perspective for those who aren't familiar with JET. I was in Fukushima, and there were, I think, 3 or 4 CIRs. So that's really a tremendous amount of CIRs for Tottori. That's really interesting. And so tell me more about interpretation on JET. Is that something that you were able to practice and get better at on JET?
Well, they do have the translation and interpreting course, which was useful for the seminar at the very end.
Mm-hmm.
To be honest, I don't know if the exercises were that great, like the stuff you send in by mail, but they do like end of the course seminar in Shiga Prefecture where they gather all the participants and they bring in professional interpreters to give talks and sessions. That was really useful. I learned a lot there. But the course itself, up to that point, was kind of like meh. You listen to a tape and you record yourself and you send in your answers, and then they were really strict about the answers and stuff.
Wow.
So, I don't know if that was super useful. I mean, it was good practice for sure, but actually listening to like actual professional interpreters tell you about their job and whatnot, and the exercises that they do, that was really useful.
And what about the actual like the times the experience you had interpreting, was that helpful, or did you only have a few?
Yeah, it didn't come that often, and we had there were 2 English speaking CIRs, and the other one was my senpai. So I think she got most of the work when it came to interpreting. So I guess you learn. It's good practice, I guess. To me at the time it was more like a job, right? So I didn't really think about learning about interpreting. It was just something I did. I mean, I guess I got better over time, but.
And is that something you do a lot of now? Or would you say, like, what percentage of your work is interpretation? Is it a small amount or not that much?
At this very moment, I'd say like 1%. It doesn't come that often anymore, at least. Well, obviously because of Corona as well.
Sure.
Like when we had more like tourists and, newspaper staff come in, magazine staff coming over, then yeah, there were some jobs here and there, even as a freelancer. Because I think currently they only have 1 English-speaking CIR at the Tottori Prefectural government, and since I'm still here in Tottori, they kind of know who I am, and they sometimes contact me to help them with interpreting duties if their 1 CIR can't cover it, right?
Okay, great. Yeah. I guess that's the benefit of kind of building up your presence in that one local area. Definitely.
Like if you live in a rural area in Japan and you have the language skills, definitely contact those local organizations, right? The international organizations, or the prefectural office, the city hall, and just let them know that you can interpret. They might contact you. So
sure. And I can also provide that advice for people in the U.S. If you're in a more rural area, definitely contact your consulate. I know Japanese consulates here keep lists of interpreters and translators because they always get requests for language support.
Right.
So what's one tip that you'd give people who are applying to JET?
So I mentioned earlier that I actually failed my first time applying to JET as a CIR. And that's because I was so nervous at the first interview. I didn't know if I should bow or if I should shake their hands. I didn't know if I should respond in Japanese or in English or whatnot. I was just a wreck. And after spending a year in Japan, I had a lot more confidence going into the interview. And the main tip is you're supposed to be a representative for your country. I think that applies to both ALT and CIR. So basically stick to your American mannerisms. It's fine. Don't be disrespectful, but you can go in there, you can shake their hands, and you are from your country. You don't have to be from America, but from whatever country you're from, you just be yourself and you represent your country and just be confident. And what's interesting is when I walked into the interview that second time, the chair was so far away from the three interviewers that I tried to pull it closer to them, and they were like, "No, no, 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 no! Don't just leave the chair there." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So I sat down, and I figured out afterwards they're probably recording this to show to prospective contracting organizations in Japan, and they can see if you guys are a match or not, right? So, I mean, I hope that doesn't make people more nervous, but just know it's probably recorded.
Got it. Yeah, I think confidence and comfort and just that they're looking for how you'll respond in a new situation. That's a great tip. So you did JET for 2 years. You taught English, did JET for 2 years, and at this point, I mean, your Japanese must have been pretty good then.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, you get a chance to polish it. Yeah, I mean, that's JET for me too. Was that same experience of just kind of being immersed. Even just having the TV on every day, at home, that was a huge help.
Yep.
And something that I regret not doing when I was studying there was getting a TV. Although at the time I was like, I'll be studying. I don't want to waste my time on TV when TV is studying sometimes. So
it definitely is. You can just watch the news and learn, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the news is one of the better things, I think. Obviously, some of these Warai Bangumi I really enjoyed, but I don't know how much language I took from them that was actually useful.
Sure. Depends what you're translating, right?
Sure, definitely. And so after JET, you start to kind of transition, I think, towards translation. And so we both shared a job, actually, not at the same time, but we both worked for a company called Intact, which was a translation agency doing a lot of different projects. Tell me how you went from JET to translation project management.
So it wasn't an immediate jump. I had applied to several different translation agencies and jobs after JET, but no one bit. Like, I guess no one considered CIR work as true translation experience. And I guess, our experiences do vary, right? Like you said, you did a lot of teaching, and some other CIRs may have done more interpreting and translation.
Definitely.
But no one was interested in my resume. And so my first job out of JET, I actually did QA work for a company that teaches language through an app online. So I was just doing like straight up QA work, just testing stuff and finding bugs and whatnot. Because I had done a little bit of like game QA work in college, or right after college, I guess. I worked on Halo 2.
Oh, cool.
As a localization tester. And that lasted about a year. And then I got laid off. And that was right around, was it 2009? So, you had the Lehman shock and all that, right? The economy's in a recession, and I couldn't find anything related to translation. I didn't really want to go back to teaching English, so I actually qualified for unemployment.
In Japan?
So I collected unemployment from the Japanese government for, I think, 6 months. And
oh, wow.
As I was running out, I was like, all right, I have to do something. And so I did ALT work for half a year. And then towards the end of that is when Intact was recruiting. I think it was because you were leaving.
Yeah, I was going back for grad school.
So I replaced you, and I got chosen to work there.
Great. How did you? Were they advertising? I'm trying to remember my experience. I feel like they advertised either in the Japan Times or online somewhere. I was trying to remember how I found it.
I can't remember. I hope it wasn't Craigslist, but it was somewhere online for sure.
Sure. Yeah.
Maybe it was Indeed or one of those job sites. I think it was a job site, I'm sure.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I contacted them and everything.
Well, that's really interesting. I want to ask real quick about the unemployment, because I feel like that's something maybe a lot of people wouldn't know about, that you would even qualify. That's so interesting. So foreign residents qualify?
Oh, for sure. As long as, I think you have to be paying your pension and some other taxes for at least 2 years or something, which I had been doing because I was a CIR for 2 years, and then I had worked another year, so I definitely qualified.
Okay, great. And was that through
Wait, no,
it?
you pay unemployment tax as an employee. That's what it is.
You got it. Yeah.
There's a really small unemployment tax. Yeah, I should know that because I'm a company now, and I
Yeah.
do that for myself and my employee. Yeah.
So when you after Tottori on Jet,
Sure.
you had relocated to Tokyo to do the
relocated.
teaching? Okay. And so you were
Yeah.
going to an unemployment office in Japan to apply for all this? Okay.
Yep. It's
Got
called
it.
Hello Work. Their
Hello Work.
unemployment office is called Hello Work. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. I was going to ask about that, but I wasn't sure if that was the same one. And I know that there is some resources through them as well. I've heard from actually Japanese people. They help job hunting services and things like that. Yeah.
They even do Japanese training. Like if you want to practice your keigo, like both young Japanese people and foreigners can go there, like practice your Japanese, especially your keigo.
Interesting. All right, I'm gonna have to find some links and see if I can share them in a post about that. But
Sure.
yeah, tell me about Intech. What your experience was like with? I mean, I remember really vividly the first day I was thrown this kind of steel company production translation, but luckily the translator was really good, and it wasn't too much work. But I felt I did find like one mistake I remember, but I remember being really tentative. I'd be like, "Can I change this? I don't know what to do." Like, and I just remember like checking with my senpai at the time and just being like, "Is this something we can change?" And they're like, "Oh yeah." And you kind of have to build that comfort level as an editor. What was the experience like for you?
It was definitely a learning experience. I don't think I was a very good localization translator at the time. Like I kind of knew more dry Japanese translation, I guess you could say. So for me, it was definitely a learning experience. I didn't do too much translation in the beginning, and I definitely didn't have to do anything technical like steel manufacturing. I think we did some like hotel related materials, some tourism related materials, and that I felt comfortable with since I did some of that, during the JET program. And so that was fine. I did definitely learn a lot from, I hope we can mention his name, Bob.
Yeah.
I basically consider him my mentor. So he taught me a lot for sure. But there's, I mentioned this on my Twitter too, but like just knowing something and actually applying it are two different things, right? Like he can tell me to write naturally as much as he can, but until I actually practice it and am able to do it, like I can understand that I need to do it, but it's hard to do when you don't necessarily have the experience, right?
Yeah, that's totally true. I think I was in the same spot. I think for me, fortunately, that first project was something drier, and it didn't require any of this kind of transcreation or localization. But also, fortunately, we just had, with any of the big projects, we had really good translators, I felt like, and that makes such a huge difference.
The A-list.
Yeah. And then, I mean, I remember working on a lot of like game proposals that were like PowerPoints and things like that.
Oh yeah.
And,
I love those. Those are great.
Those were fun. Yeah. And then, but also equally dry stuff like technical manuals for the arcade games from different
or the
companies.
actual arcade cabinets.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, those were actually kind of meditative to check because it was just so just cut and dry, to be honest, and making sure the same language was maintained. But yeah, it was a really good learning experience. But yeah, I think I ended up doing a project for Intech after I came back to the US and just realizing like I'm still not that great at translation yet. But going to grad school for writing definitely helped me on the other side of the equation, right? Like getting my English in gear in terms of like working on English writing. Is there anything that you did in terms of like writing training, like growing up, that you think was helpful? I'm always curious to know what translators did when they were growing up in terms of writing.
If I'm going to tell you the honest truth, I'm a terrible writer.
Oh no.
Like every single grade in high school was an A, except for like English and English composition, and history. I think those were my two like quote unquote bad grades. Like I'm more of an interactive kind of guy. Like I prefer watching movies, videos,
Hmm.
talking to people. And I'm not that big of a reader and writer. So it's kind of interesting. Like I kind of feel like a false translator, a false localizer, a fake localizer, because most other great localizers I know are great. Are they just love books? They're
Hmm.
passionate about reading and writing, and some people have gone on to actually be game writers as well.
Hmm.
I don't think I'll ever be in that position, but I'm not disappointed either because I know kind of where my strengths are and how to work within those strengths. So, and I've gotten better at writing just through experience. So I'm not like a terrible writer. It's just I don't consider it a natural strength of mine.
Yeah, I would say I'm definitely in that same spot. It took a lot of work for me. It's funny that you mentioned history. I was terrible at history growing up. It's
Mhm.
just really bad, even through college. And then
Right.
even with my college thesis, I could tell it was just a monstrosity. It was just too long. It wasn't well
Okay.
organized.
Mhm.
But it wasn't until I started blogging that was what really helped me, just deciding, okay, I'm going to
Right.
put a blog post online, 3 days a week, and just getting that
Mhm.
repetition. So I would definitely
Mhm.
recommend some kind of repetitions, if you can kind of force yourself into that for anyone listening. But what about on the business side? Is there anything that you took away from your time at Intech in terms of like how translation runs as a business, or how to run a business, that you think was helpful looking back?
I mean, I learned about like the profit margins that they're earning, what they're charging end clients, and how much of a cut the agency needs to take. But I don't think any of that is really that useful.
Hmm.
In terms of management, I mean, I guess I learned how to manage a project more or less
Sure.
from beginning to end. I mean, we were only checkers, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess sometimes we did translation if the project was small enough.
Sure.
But um, yeah, I mean, you set a schedule, you set a budget, you send it out, you get it back, you check it, and you deliver it. I mean, it's not that difficult.
Hmm.
So there's not that much to learn besides just doing it.
Sure.
So not too much.
Okay.
I mean, I guess one caveat is, you learn that you do need the client, right? You need the client in order to have the business. And that's what the other people were doing, right? We had a sales team. I think the company president was also, pretty big into sales. He would go and visit the end clients personally and pull in business that way. So if there's no business to pull in, there's no work to be done. I guess that's
Sure.
the one takeaway I had.
Yeah, I mean, I was there during the Lehman shock, right? So it
Right.
was things were a little slow at times, but it's funny,
Hmm.
I think we were just so kind of, because I had a job and because I was working,
Hmm.
I was felt so separated from that. So it was an interesting time to be there. But
Oh, yeah.
did you go freelance like immediately after Intech?
I did. I
Okay.
mean, I would say Intech was the impetus for me to go freelance
Okay.
because I was sending out work to freelancers, getting back translations, and thinking, I'm pretty sure I could do this as well. And I had already started freelancing a couple of other gigs, not actually translation related. And so at the time, I was like, okay, I think it's time I leave. I mean, to be honest, the company was in a rough spot.
Hmm. Hmm.
I don't want to say too much, but yeah,
Hmm.
financially they weren't doing so great, and I thought it was time for me to leave. And so yeah, I had some other gigs lined up. I think even Intact sent me some checking gigs afterwards, and
Hmm.
I started building up my client base from there. So
Okay.
yeah, I did go straight to freelance
That's great.
after that.
In terms of that's one question I'm curious. Well, actually, let me start with one interesting
Hmm.
question. When you went freelance, did you start with a translation memory software, and is that something you would recommend for people just starting, or is that something that you should not be investing in right away?
In terms of whether you should invest in it or not, that is dependent on your field of expertise. Especially if you deal with a lot of dry material, a lot of repetitive material. I think it would be useful if you learn how to use TM software and leverage, the translation memory. At Intech, I went to a iJet seminar, um, So IJET is what? What is it? What does it stand for? Oh, IJET is just the name of the seminar. But
Hmm.
JAT runs it, right? The Japanese Association of Translators. So
Okay.
they hold they usually hold an annual meeting or a biannual meeting in Japan at least, because every other year it's overseas, where they bring all the translators together and they do seminars about this and that. And I'd learned about Felix there in 2010. It was like an offshoot session, but
Hmm.
the programmer was there. He's talking about Felix, which is free now, by the way, because he can't upkeep the program.
Hmm.
So if people want to play around with TM software, look up Felix Cat,
Okay.
and it should come up. But yeah, he was talking about his software, and that's where I learned about TMs. And I tried to use it at Intact at work. It didn't really work because the stuff we work with isn't that repetitive,
Yeah.
at least at the time. From what I'm hearing now, they do a lot of repetitive manual work and stuff. So it probably would be useful to leverage a TM. But yeah, if you work in cars, automobiles, medical stuff, contracts, stuff that has a lot of repetitive text, it would be useful to learn how to use translation memory software. Or if you sign up with an agency that uses TM software and basically requires you to use it, then yeah, definitely learn how to use it. But in those cases, usually they provide you a license and you don't need to actually purchase the software. So
Okay.
yeah, but definitely learn how to use it.
Okay. Got it. And did you learn through online tutorials or other courses?
Just purely experience, I'd say.
Okay. Cool.
I mean,
Just
I
playing
think
around
in
with
the
it.
very beginning, yeah, I probably did watch a tutorial or two, but I mean, the basics are basics, right?
Hmm.
Like learn about what a TM does, how to use it, and learn what a glossary does and how to use it. But there are some like small advanced tips that you could learn that some are software specific, some are not.
Got it.
Stuff like concordance searches, that's really useful.
Hmm.
So can I describe it really quickly? Let's see.
Sure. Yeah.
So a translation memory will pull up entire sentences for you if it's in the memory.
Hmm.
And a glossary will pull up terms for you if it's in the glossary memory. But if there are clauses within a sentence, like let's say the middle of the sentence exists somewhere else, neither the translation memory nor the glossary will be pulled up, depending on your software. But normally it's not pulled up. So if it's not registered completely, it won't be pulled up, basically, right? If it's just a partial match. And what a concordance search does, it lets you do partial searches. So you search, a clause of a sentence or a term that wasn't logged into the glossary yet, but you can search if it exists elsewhere in the translation memory. That's really useful to learn.
Okay. Great.
And utilize. Yeah.
And the other kind of introductory question I wanted to ask was, in the beginning, and maybe even now, how much time were you spending doing the translation work versus doing the sales work and bringing in those clients?
In the beginning, it was a lot of resume spamming, I'd say. You're trying to build up that client base. But if it's one thing, again, that I learned from Intact, or if it was another thing I learned from Intact, is that usually agencies have an A list, like their best translators, their go-to translators. And they have their B list, which is kind of like, the backup translators. And then they have a blacklist, the people they want to avoid. And so I think there are two strategies you can take. You can try to become the go-to translator, the A translator for an agency or a client. Or you can be the B translator that always says yes. And so I was kind of teetering between the two, like somewhere between A and B. Because if I never said no, you kind of become the A, right?
Mm.
Like, oh, this guy was always available. This guy will always take a job. I can rely on him. I'm going to send him the job. I'm just going to contact him from the get-go instead of trying to contact this other guy who's always busy, right? So yeah, I was spending my time trying to find my A client and building up my B clients.
Great.
In the beginning. And
Yeah.
then I guess, how long did that take? I guess I was basically doing that for 3 or 4 years. So, you kind of jump from, one set of clients to another set of clients, kind of.
Sure.
Depending. on the wave. Things go up and down.
Yeah, I was talking to Doug Durgee recently.
Oh, yeah.
You knew him on Jet, right?
Oh, I talk to him all the time.
Great. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was talking to him the other day, and one thing he said that really stood out to me was that in the beginning he said, "I'm going to put in a 9 to 5 day, no matter what, whether I have translation work or not." And that really kind of I was like, oh wow, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so you did freelance translation. I know you incorporated at some point. When and how did you make that decision?
So the main agency I work for started handing me entire projects. So in the beginning, it was just my worth of work, my segments, my section, and then they started handing me more and more work, and I was like, I can't handle all of this. Can I pull in a translator or two?
Mm.
And they agreed. So everything was on board, above board, and I started basically managing these mini teams for these medium-sized projects, and then the projects just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's a lot of logistics if they have to do the payments and everything. And so in 2019, I said, why don't I just incorporate and let me take care of everything, all the logistics, all the payments, all the scheduling. You just hand me the work and I'll get it done. And they said, yeah, we can do that. And ever since then, I've been incorporated. I've been handling huge projects. I was the co-PM for PSO2, Fantasy Star Online 2. It was a lot of text, by the way.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And so, yeah, it just kind of happened naturally because that agency decided, I would handle these batches, these entire big batches of work.
That's cool. So in that sense, you're starting to provide more than just translation as a service. You're providing the management of the project also as a service.
Yeah, and basically the language lead in most of them, at least.
Very cool.
So yeah.
And man, that's really interesting. Is that something that's hard, do you think, in terms of like just logistically in Japan, getting set up so that you can? I mean, in the U.S., you'd probably be required to fill out a W-9 or some kind of tax form like that. Is it the same in Japan?
I hired an accountant, and they basically did everything for me.
Oh, nice.
And it didn't cost that much, I think. Oh gosh, I need to look back at my records. I think it was like under $2,000 for everything, like for them to help you incorporate and just do all the paperwork required and hire, whoever is needed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you pay the right people, and they'll do it for you.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's great. I mean, that makes so much sense.
I don't think it's that hard to establish an LLC in America, though.
Okay.
From what I remember, a buddy telling me, a buddy who's an accountant in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
I think you just fill out a form and you pay the like $100 fee or something. I don't even know if it's $100. It might be cheaper than that. It might be like $20 or something. But I what he said was it's not that hard. So he himself had set up like 4 LLCs because that was the most tax efficient way to handle his finances. He's the accountant, so he would know. But yeah.
So you're also probably giving out translation trials, then, I imagine. Is that true? When you're taking...
Yes, I do. I do that.
Well, man, that's something that I'd be curious to ask about, since you're on both sides of the equation, probably reviewing trials and doing trials. What are your thoughts on trials?
Ooh, I had given a talk at one of the iJets a couple years ago. Can I pull up my slides? Let's see. I think my main tips were figure out what the purpose of the text is, because that will help you determine the tone of your text and the language you use. Because if you're translating system text, you don't want to be too loose. You want to be a little more straightforward. And if you're doing dialogue, then you don't want to be too dry, and you want to be a little more creative. And so if you can figure out exactly and also if you can figure out what they're testing you on, because there's probably a purpose for them testing you like this particular text. Like, are they trying to test if you can do like a pirate accent, or are they trying to test if you look up the exact term for the A button or the left stick on a PS4 system versus a Nintendo Switch system, because they're called different things for different systems, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can figure out the purpose of the text, that'll help navigate how you translate it and provide the quote unquote correct answers.
Got it. Yeah, that makes so much sense.
Yeah. I mean, not everything's going to be a curveball, but you kind of want to try to figure out, what is the trick here? Because they're probably trying to trick you somehow.
Sure. That's so funny. I mean, I guess in that sense, it's a lot like, a standardized test where a lot of these questions are kind of built to as logic puzzles to a certain extent.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Well, man, that's super interesting. And then in terms of work-life balance, what are things like for you? Are you able
I'm so bad at that.
Oh, yeah?
So bad at that. I try to keep my weekends open for my family and my kids. I try to finish work by 6 p.m. It doesn't always happen that way.
Sure.
Yeah. If there's an oatmeal page about working from home. If you check that out, that's basically me in a nutshell.
Okay.
It's really funny too. So we can look that up later. You can
Definitely.
link it or something.
I'll find that link. Yeah. Oatmeal's great.
Mhm.
Well, yeah. And speaking of your time, I don't want to take up too much more of it, but I did want to talk about whiskey before we go, because I know you're big into whiskey. What was your gateway into spirits in general, and also Japanese spirits?
Okay. I guess in my 20s, I was like almost any other drinker. I assume like any other drinker who drinks cocktails, and my go-to was like a whiskey and Coke. But I never really drank hard spirits until my 30s. And the impetus was my buddy coming to Japan. I was already living here, and he was like, "Let's go to the Yamazaki distillery." And so I was like, I'm not big a fan of drinking straight whiskey, but it's Yamazaki. They're a big name. This was like 2015 or 16.
Okay.
It wasn't that long ago, I guess. And so I went. He bought a shot of Yamazaki 25, which is a very, very rare whiskey for those who don't know.
Yeah.
I think we were provided 10 or 15 milliliters. So, yeah, just like a really small amount. And it was $30 for just that 15 milliliters.
Wow.
And like for whiskey drinkers that know, that's a good deal. And for people that don't know, they would think we're crazy. But I think he bought me a shot too. This guy's pretty well off. And so I put it up to my nose and instantly fell in love. It just smelled amazing. Like I wanted to just rub it all over my neck so I could smell it all day. The aroma is great. The taste, it still burned a little bit because I wasn't used to drinking straight whiskey, but it still tasted really good. And I was so amazed at how good this whiskey was that I wanted to discover whiskey more. And from there, I talked to a friend who was into whiskey, and he recommended Balvenie 12-year Double Wood. It's a Scotch at 40% ABV. So I figure, yeah, I'll try it out. It's a good entry whiskey. That's a good gateway whiskey, is what a lot of Scotch enthusiasts will say for people to get into.
Nice.
And yeah, from there, it just kind of blew off. Like, now I have like several hundred bottles on my shelf.
Nice.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I mean, during the pandemic, one thing that I've been doing to kind of distract myself is kind of getting into rum and mezcal. And I do feel like the collecting aspect of it is almost more dangerous than the alcohol aspect of it. There's definitely that Pokemon, got to collect them all kind of.
Yep. It ruined us as collectors, and especially with like whiskey being so expensive. How is rum for you, by the way? I'm curious.
Rum it's actually really cheap still. There's definitely bottles that are pricey, but I would say there's a lot of really good bottles that are in the $30 to $50, $60 range.
Oh, definitely.
Are extremely complex. And I do feel like, I liked bourbon. I remember my brother got me a bottle of bourbon when he came to visit me in Japan one time, and that was really my first time. I was still on Jet, and I remember like just drinking it in my Jet apartment and being like, "Oh wow, this is really good." And so that was kind of a way in, but I still feel like, with rum, it's been more accessible in terms of, okay, you've got pot still, you've got Jamaican, you've got Haitian, you've got these blended whiskeys, aged with rums, blended rums, aged rums, rums finished in Europe, in different barrels and things like that, and pretty quickly was able to kind of differentiate different styles. But with whiskey and mezcal actually too has been really difficult. But whiskey, I still don't know. In terms of, are there any like guideposts that you give people on whiskey in terms of, here's like 3 or 4 variables that you might look for when you're getting into whiskey?
Well, have you had a lot of Scotch whiskey or
Just,
Irish whiskey, or
I've had like
you've only drank bourbon?
Lafroig and Ardbeg and
Oh,
some of the classics, but
okay.
just those super peaty ones. But that's kind of what I thought about mezcal at first. But it's always very smoky, always very peaty, right? With Scotch, but I guess that's not the case.
That is definitely not the case. That is the case with most Islay whiskeys. It comes from the island of Islay. Those are the smoky peaty whiskeys, but there's the rest of Scotland to discover, basically. If you want something that's not smoky, look for something from the Highlands. Look for something from Speyside, which would be a little sweeter and fruitier. The Balvenie, I believe, is a Speyside. So it's definitely not peaty. In fact, why don't you try it if you have the chance?
Yeah,
Like,
I'm gonna
find like a sample or shot or somewhere or something.
Absolutely.
Definitely try that one. It's good. And especially if you come from bourbon, that would be a good one to start with. If you want to find out more about, say, Japanese whiskey or spirits, there's a blogger called Whiskey Richard, and he runs the website Nomunication. Is it .co.jp or .com? I can't remember. Anyways, it's Nomunication something.
Okay.
There are books out there written by like Stephen Lyman, The Complete Guide to Japanese Drinks. And you might know this name, Brian Ashcraft.
Yes.
He writes for Kotaku. He also loves whiskey and sake. So he actually released a book about Japanese whiskey a couple of years ago. Japanese Whiskey, The Ultimate Guide. You can check that out.
Nice. And Stephen Lyman, I think he's got a pretty good Twitter presence from what I remember, right? He does a lot of Instagram events with Christopher Pellegrini, another great writer.
Yep.
Those are some
and he
good
also
resources.
runs a Discord for like Japanese drink enthusiasts. So I'm in that too.
Oh, nice.
So I have a direct line to basically all these people: Brian Ashcraft, Stephen Lyman.
Nice. And I do have to thank you for the one recommendation you gave me. When I went to Japan, I think in 2018 for a business trip, I just reached out and said, what's a good bottle of bourbon I could pick up while in Japan that might be exclusive? And you recommended this Evan Williams bottle.
The 12-year.
Yeah, is it 101 or is it?
It's a 12-year 101 proof. Yeah.
Yeah, man, that was really good. And my mom drank the last like 2 inches when she came to visit me in Chicago a couple years ago.
There we go.
But it was like, like 3,000, 4,000 yen, something like that. Mm-hmm. It was really good.
And in the States, it cost over $100.
Yeah.
And only available at the distillery.
Yeah, that's what I was seeing. Are there any other bottles you would recommend in terms of, I mean, not necessarily bourbon, but just ones that people might keep an eye out for if they're, I mean, man, I don't know when people are going to be able to go back, but when they do, if they're looking to bring home a souvenir of some kind.
I think all of the big names are already known to people. Yamazaki, all the Nikas. If it was something you want to bring home, you might want to look into Fuji Sunnoku by Kirin. I don't know if they're exporting that or not.
Mm-hmm.
But the signature blend, it's in a black bottle or black label. I think that one's a pretty good one, and it's decently priced at 4,000 or 5,000 yen. Which is about $50. But what I've been looking into lately is aged shochu. And so in Japan, if shochu is a really dark color, it can't be called shochu. But it also can't be called whiskey because it's not whiskey. Although I think some companies or some distilleries are exporting that to America as whiskey because according to American laws, it can be called whiskey. But anyways, I've been trying to find some in Japan and trying them out. I think legally they need to be called liqueurs in Japan, but they're pretty tasty. Like a 7-year shochu aged in a sherry barrel is really good. Nice. So it might be a hidden gem, for people who are coming to Japan and looking for, some kind of Japanese spirit.
Nice. Yeah, man, I would take any of those recommendations based on how good that one Evan Williams bottle was. So,
It's a rare one. That's a whole nother story if you wanted to talk about like investing in whiskey or like
Oh yeah, I mean that's
that's a
interesting.
whole nother story. Yeah.
In terms of investing, you mean like speculating, not speculating, but like actually investing, like
Sort
looking
of,
to
yeah.
sell?
Like I don't do it too often, but like sometimes I come across a bottle that I buy that I was planning to drink, but then like the price goes up 4 or 5 times. And I'm like, well, if I could sell that and buy 5 other bottles, why wouldn't I, you know? So sometimes like I don't mean to like sell bottles, but like if they go up in price, you start to consider your alternatives. I have a friend who is really into Japanese whiskey. It's the same friend that took me to the Yamazaki distillery. But sometimes he would send me money just to buy whiskey for him.
Hmm.
And so I'm holding onto a lot of bottles for him. But like some of the prices for these bottles, like okay, it was a Yamazaki bottle called Owner's Cask, and I think it cost like 3,500 US dollars when we bought it.
Hmm.
Now that's a lot of money for a single bottle of whiskey. I don't know if he plans to drink it or not. It's still sitting in my house. But I think I checked auction prices just the other day, and it's gone up like double,
Wow.
if not more. And so I don't know if he's buying these bottles as investments or not, but they definitely exist as investments. And so, if you consider it a vehicle for investment, you can do that. Although saying that might piss off a lot of passionate whiskey enthusiasts, so you might want to cut that out.
Yeah. No, no. It's interesting.
Because it's two sides. It's two sides to the story, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I tweeted about the other day. Because like even in the entertainment industry, you have the business side of things and you have the actual entertainment side of things, right? Like not all creators are going to be able to create things they want to, right? I mean, I
Hmm.
think that's why Inagaki left Capcom.
Mm.
Or is it, no, 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 no. I got the wrong name. Yeah, Inafune. Keiji Inafune. I'm pretty sure that's why he left Capcom, right? Because he wanted to make his Mega Man when Capcom was like, nope, we're done with Mega Man. And so he made Mighty Number 9, right?
Sure.
So yeah, even in the whiskey world, there's the business end, there's the whiskey drinker end, and then there's also the secondary market, which some people approve of, some people don't, but it exists. So you
Yeah.
either live with it or ignore it or participate in it,
Yeah. Do a little bit of both.
or do a little bit of both. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, man, that was really fascinating. Thanks so much for your time today. And man, I think a lot of really good tips too for aspiring translators.
Oh, sure.
At the end, I want to ask just a few quick questions. I think I'll keep it short this season,
Sure.
and this will be questions I ask everyone. So, do you have a favorite kind of onigiri?
Oh, it used to be tuna. Has it changed? Um, okay, it used to be tuna because I guess there weren't that many varieties back in the day, right? You had salmon, tuna, maybe seaweed.
Hmm.
Uh, but lately, like a lot of the convenience stores have started doing meats.
Hmm.
So you can find like bulgogi onigiri or yakiniku onigiri.
Oh,
And I
nice.
love meat, so I would probably say one of those meat onigiris. Buta no kakuni onigiri. Yeah. So
Nice.
anything with meat in it is probably a good one.
All right, next question is what's your go-to Japanese karaoke song?
Oh, I haven't been to karaoke in forever. And actually, just to mention, my first year living in Japan, I went to karaoke all the time
Hmm.
because it's a good way to learn kanji
Sure.
because it always has the furigana above the kanji, and so it's an easy way to like memorize and learn kanji better. Like even if you're not singing, you can just watch other people sing their songs and basically, skim the kanji. But let's see. Oh, I think there was a Ketsumeshi song called
Oh, nice.
was it Sakura?
Yeah, I think
I think
so.
I sang that one quite often.
Yeah, Kitsumeshi is one of the first pop bands that I learned about. They're maybe a little bit old school now, I think.
Yeah, for sure, sure.
But
Again, like I'm not going to karaoke. I've got 2 kids and stuff,
yeah,
so
yeah. No, I mean, but
and
that
it's
dates
pandemic
me
going.
too. Yeah,
Right,
like
right.
somebody when I first went in 2002 recommended that band. But yeah, they have some
Okay.
good songs.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
And
Oh, there
mhm.
was another band I really liked. What were they called? Sadly, I can't remember their name right now. They're from Okinawa. Oh shoot, what was their name? They were kind of like a rap kind of pop band as well. Anyways,
Nice.
it'll probably come back later.
If you think of it, let me know and I'll share it.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the last question that I like to ask everybody is, what's something you remember from your very first week in Japan? I guess it would have been on that high school trip.
On that high school trip. Okay, I've got a story for you. So,
Uh,
we were in the hotel room, and there's nothing else to do. We were playing cards, and we turned on the TV. And what's his name? Shimura Ken,
mm,
rest in peace. He died
yeah.
from the coronavirus. He was on the TV, and he was doing a skit with naked ladies running around the room, and I was like, wait a minute, this is not a paid channel or anything. This is public TV, at least in the 90s, or well, the year 2000. And he could be on public TV with naked ladies running around as part of his skit, and that just shocked me. I was in high school, and I was like, wow, this is really different.
Yeah,
You say
so
that
funny.
you say the F word in the States, and that's considered rated R, and they're not going to air it or whatever. But here in Japan, at least at the time, you could have this, rated R content on TV. So that
Yeah,
was pretty
man, the comedy is very different. I remember some crazy slapstick stuff that
sure.
definitely had some safety issues, and maybe would not fly anymore from that
Right.
standpoint either. Uh,
Oh, you mean like Takeshi's Castle and all that, or
yeah,
something else?
and yeah, things like that. And then there was
Okay.
another one I can't remember what it was, but yeah, something very much along those lines.
Right, right, right.
Well, thanks again, Mel. This is really a great conversation. And where can people find you online?
I'm not that public. I guess you can find me on Twitter. My handle is ACELEE, Acelee.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Um,
Yeah, that's a
yeah.
really good. I think your feed is really nice and focused with a lot of great information for translators.
Yeah,
So.
I try not to like talk about anything else besides localization. So
Yeah, I admire that. I cannot. Unfortunately, I do not. I do not have that patience,
that's
that
fine.
focus. But yeah,
It's fine.
great feed. Highly recommend following Mel. So thanks so much, and hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. You can find How to Japanese on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Substack, TikTok. I'm probably on it if it's out there. So check us out, and we'll see you next week. それではまた来週.